I'm joined by Declan Bogue to talk about an interview he's done in the Irish Examiner this week. It's with Dr. Ciarán Kearney, and it's a guy that you've been chasing for not weeks but months. And when the interview happened, he actually contacted you.
Yeah, well, when you say he contacted me, I might have said that, but I mean, I had been chasing him for a long time. Just by way of introduction, I suppose probably should say that um, I suppose it's the nerd in me that had noticed that this is a man who, when St Mary's World Cup in 2017, and then I had noticed that Paddy Talley would have had this guy in his backroom teams. He certainly was there with Derry, and then he popped up again with Down. Uh, but also like going around the various county finals and championships and Ulster club scene and all that, you start to notice wee things like, and Kieran was very much in the background. He wasn't front and centre or doing Mayor Farnia or standing on the manager's shoulder during any games or anything like that. He was always kind of maybe sitting among the subs, and he was I spotted him with Trillick, with Kilcoo footballers, and with Dunloy hurlers also. So nobody goes into those kind of environments uh, and stays. And like, I mean, I would have been mooching about and asking different people, what is this guy like? And it was remarkable because people won't really get into the very specifics of it. Um, but they will say that this guy is impressive. He fosters a real sense of togetherness, community, uh, and even though the answers I was getting were sort of vague, their eyes were lighting up every time. And you don't go into clubs like Trellick with very austere, serious kind of individuals like they have, or even Dunloy, or even various county setups without having plenty about you. So I wanted to know more about him. Got in touch with him ages ago. Then he actually called me and sent me a book that he had contributed to the third edition of Pure Sport with Dr. John Kramer and Dr. Aidan Moore, who recently passed away. And we sort of opened up a wee bit of a dialogue, sending each other links, taking interest in each other's work, and all the rest. And then eventually, when the coronavirus crisis came to light, he said to me, "Let's do this interview because we have plenty of time in our hands." And I suppose that's him nicely helping me out. But at the same time, it couldn't have come at a better time because he is behavioural scientist. He has more letters behind his name than is in Boris, than the full name of Boris and Ossory, and he's able to contextualise probably better than most what this situation's about, what we're experiencing, human emotions, what we're all going to feel, how we're going to react as individuals and as a group, and and I think that I tried to get that across at least anyway.
And like, so just to give a bit more context, he's kind of one of these guys who builds a culture around a team. I see reference to combining the me with the we within the article. Also, he's been involved with, you've kind of mentioned him there, Down, Derry, St Mary's, Kilcoo, Dunloy, and then also project coordinator with the Gaelfast coaches team,
Mm-hmm.
which is designed to reinvigorate Gaelic games in Belfast. But if you were to jump onto the conversation and how that aligned with talking about the coronavirus and how behaviours, how everything will be changed, I suppose, so dramatically by this. How did the conversation go, and was there any particular highlights that you kind of touched on?
Well, I mean, he said certain things to us. Like, I mean, one thing he said, we're in the preparation phase, and that's when you think about that, that's very grim. That's a grim but entirely accurate observation. Like, we were in the preparation phase. People think this is catastrophe right now because they're not able to go to Hoth for fish and chips. The selfishness we've seen within individuals coming together, then we're lumping them all together then in groups, like you're saying, oh, what about that shower out in Hoth, as if that was one particular community that all decided to go to Hoth, one time. That's just a load. That's just a makeup of, dozens of individuals who are making that choice to go out to a place altogether. And then the same applies to Nuts Corner up here, which is a sort of a popular market on a Sunday. People are flooded to that. People went to the Tesco's and all that in their droves. So when he says this is the preparation phase, what he's really getting at is there's a world of suffering coming down our tracks. And that's what kind of stood out to me is we're only preparing. We need to actually think about how we're going to deal with things. We need to mourn in a different way. He said, like, we need to find different ways of mourning. And I'll give you an example of that. On Saturday morning, myself and the wife, we took our third child up to the local chapel here. He was being christened. And so we christened Rory Connor is his name. He was christened. There was no grandparents. There was none of my siblings, none of Ciara's siblings, no godparents. It was a completely non-contact christening. The priest didn't even hardly touch Thomas or Rory Connor. And we did it at 9:30 in the morning because there was a funeral coming in straight after. And the priest told me after that that's the last funeral I'll be doing now. There's no more funerals. It's basically a burial. So we're going to lose loved ones, and they're going to go straight into burial, or they're going to be cremated. It's so grim. It doesn't bear thinking about. So when he says we need to find a different way of mourning, I can't think of anything more pertinent to think about right now, because we're going to have to get this all together, and whether that means large-scale memorial services for people after all this is through, I don't know. But he certainly has sharpened my appreciation of what is to come.
Because one of the big things that often occurs to me, as much as I believe in psychology, I think you can't not. I mean, it definitely affects so many interactions you have, is I wonder at times, with the vagueness of a message that's given to you, you might talk to a psychologist 3 or 4 times, and at the end of it, they're trying to lead you on a journey of self-discovery and self-realization and all that, and at the end of it, you're a bit like, that was all very vague, and if you don't get to that destination that maybe you're supposed to get to, you might even resent sort of the person delivering this very vague message.
Yeah, well, I mean, are you talking about sports psychology in general, or sports psychology people that work within teams?
I suppose, both, because I've kind of done, I've done both. I've tried it in real life, and I've been exposed to it in sport. And
Yes.
I can't imagine that anything that someone would say to you at the moment is anything more than vague, because obviously nobody knows what the consequences of what are about to happen are. So I just find it tough to buy into it when I know that no matter what message I get, it's going to be pretty vague. Now, that's not an attack on Dr. Ciarán Kearney, but it's just kind of that would be the difficulty I'd have with it. I'd love to hear it, but I'm not sure I'm going to hear anything more than a vagueness.
Yeah, I don't here. I am so not qualified to talk about this in whatsoever, sports psychology or anything. I just know that it is something that I'm interested in, and I'm not saying that I sit down and read textbooks. I do read the odd book here and there about it. And what I would say is, when it comes to, like, say, for example, sports psychology, there are people that click with teams and people that click with players within teams, but that's not to say it's right across the board. I mean, I remember doing a book I did years ago, and Stephen McDonald was one of the characters in the book, and he said that he wanted to pull the head off a certain psychologist, that his head was about to go with him. He didn't like his interfering in trainings and different things like that. And yet another member of the Armagh team that was very successful alongside Stephen said this is the biggest influence in his life outside his own family. You're going to get that. Like, I mean, it's like Dara O'Shea. I think it was Dara O'Shea, certainly one of the O'Sheas, but almost certain it was Dara that said about sports psychologists coming in to Kerry that he didn't need one personally, but he had no problem whatsoever if he thought it was going to help other people. And by that, I think, well, look at, Dara's born into kind of footballing royalty. He's an O'Shea, he's renowned, he's got Paddy, as an uncle who's just filling him full of confidence, probably knows that he won't be dropped, when he's coming into his young football life. And, he probably feels that I'm born to win All Irelands. But then you take a guy like, maybe say someone like a Paul Galvin, comes from the north of the county, probably known as a hurler foremost. Like, maybe someone like that within that same team might really need that. There are other teams, other people that have been involved in teams that have really forged a togetherness and a real bond with the players, and they respond to that. And you can't deny that. Equally, then there are plenty of people that come into teams that just the whole thing, the whole enterprise just does not work out. And then you got to ask, well, was that team not far enough down their road of evolution? Were they not being led in a certain way? I don't know. These are all the factors I can't. They're completely intangibles. When you're talking about psychology itself, I can get more out of a walk down the road with a man that walks up and down this country road here, and occasionally I see him and I stop him, and he's a right few years my senior. But a walk up and down the road with that man there would do absolute wonders for my mind anyway. I know that. So, I mean, it's all about who you can relate to, I suppose.
What I'm kind of trying to figure out from this is, because you certainly have an awful lot of time for him, and I don't know Dr. Kearney, but if you look at, let's say, the Tipperary hurlers back in 2014, I know some of the players would have spoken to Ciarán McGeeney, who came in as a sports psychologist and had good time for him. Now, I don't know if that's completely across the board, but definitely a couple of people said positive things. Then if you look at Dennis Leamy, he was in with the Tipperary hurlers, the former Munster rugby player, in 2016, won the All-Ireland. Then you've Dougie Howlett, legendary name, New Zealand record try scored a whole lot, in with Cork last year. And I remember questioning at the time, what on earth is this lad going to tell a team that have been right on the cusp anyway? Because, coming in from a different sport, they're already high achievers. I just don't get what's going to be so translatable when people say he'll come in and set standards. I just find that so vague and infuriating. So a lot of guys come in, and I don't know how much, if anything, these guys get paid, but you win an All-Ireland and all of a sudden that person is seen as kind of that crucial X factor. You lose the All-Ireland, no one says anything. No one said anything about Dougie Howlett, and what, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not sure what the value of that was. But you hear, like, it's just, I find it so frustrating also when you have someone who's got a bit of a profile already, and because they've done well in their kind of particular realm, all of a sudden they're recruited as either a sports psychologist or a mental health expert or someone setting the standards. And I just kind of find that frustrating. Whereas Dr. Kearney, he's probably coming at it from more of a qualification background and working his way up. So I'm just trying to find out what sets him apart.
Well, I have no idea, because the only people that can answer that are people that have played under them. But I do find your point interesting, that, if you win something, if you're part of a winning team, then, this is what everybody has to do, or these are the people that get it all right. And we're so guilty of that, and no more so than really. What do most people consume in terms of media? Say, for example, the whole country would sit down and watch an All-Ireland final, right? And up until now, they would have been exposed to maybe Colm O'Rourke, Pat Spillane and Joe Brawley, and with the greatest respect to what all of them can contribute, none of them, I mean, we're in 2020, and none of those people have even played football this century. It's a bit like, the John Giles thing, and people have certain revered figures, but you gotta wonder sometimes, like, how much relevance do they have to that very moment, and in that, then you can have people like, say, for example, Brawley and Spillane and O'Rourke. Their longevity is because they understand television and they understand the medium, and they understand that teasing out a nuanced point, while it might be extremely worthy and clever and the right thing to do, but it doesn't work in television. You're better off just going with broad brush. This team will never do it because they are celebrity losers, or use phrases like that are catchy, provocative, and all the rest, but it also will attract people in. It will cause a bit of a stir on social media. It will get newspaper columnists exercised and all that. So when most people sit down and watch Mayo lose an All-Ireland final replay, and people are saying, well, sure, told you so. Like, they just don't have it in them to beat them. They will look at, say, Mayo and their backroom team and say, oh, that boy he never won anything. And sure, how could they win anything with your man who's doing the strength condition, whatever, like, all those kind of support staff, because everybody gets the blame in those instances. Whereas, like, a slip here or there and they come out the right side of that, well, then suddenly the spotlight is on the losing team and they've done everything wrong. I mean, Dublin, I could be wrong, but I'm almost certain sure of this, that I'm absolutely 100% right in this. Dublin have had a man from Tyrone who has apparently would never have set foot in his local GA ground. He's a table tennis player, not from GA background whatsoever, who was a hydration expert in the Dublin camp over the last few years under Jim Gavin. Now, there's one for you. And, if there's ever a piece done on it. But can you imagine the scorn, say, for example, that if Mayo lost their latest All-Ireland final to Dublin, and it was, and maybe one of the aforementioned pundits that we're after talking about heard that there was a hydration expert in Mayo, it would have been held up as a figure of fun and something to be laughed at and scorned. So when you say that, like, I mean, sometimes it's just about clicking. And I'll give you another example. Someone like Damien Barton has been involved in lots of club teams and stuff like that around the country, right? And he would have been the manager of Jordanstown when Sean Kavanagh was there. And, he was a teacher in Dungannon, and he knew that Sean Kavanagh had something, but Sean Kavanagh was a bit of maybe not the most gracious athlete when he was a teenager or just coming into first, second year. Now, he was winning All Ireland, don't get anything wrong, but he knew there was more. He knew there was far more in terms of building an engine. So he used to actually meet Sean Kavanagh in his spare time while he was the manager of Jordanstown to bring him for sprints on the track. And saying, like, Tyrone, and his message, like, for a Derry man, when you think about it, it was remarkable that Tyrone need you. Tyrone need you to be this guy. So he moulded Sean Kavanagh in some way. Obviously, like, people in his club and Mickey Hart and so on moulded him. But he was another selfless kind of guy that was going beyond what he needed to do in order to mould a player. Then you take his record in somewhere like Ballinderry. He was there. He didn't actually win anything with Ballinderry, but the Conley Gilligan generation of player, the Ron McGuckins, all those kind of lads, said that he brought them on. He brought them on something shocking, that when he left and the next year then they started winning big under Brian McIver, whoever it was. Same with Slot Neil. They won a championship in 2004, I think it was, their first one under John Brown, after a couple of years of Damien Barton. And it happened one or two other times in different clubs. But, he certainly, and everyone would who played under him would give him the credit for having laid groundwork. Just because there's not the same number of championships beside his name, does that make him a failure? I don't think it does. Like, I think that the way we talk about these things can be extremely crude. And, but hey.
Because, like, just in teams over the years, I don't want to name names now, but I've had a few different people come in and, that would just be in occasionally or maybe once ever. And, one guy came and he did a two-part sort of a training session. One was drills out in the field. It revolved around tackling. An awful lot was around tackling and winning breaking ball and how you position yourself, etc., etc. And I found that really good, really helpful. And as far as I was concerned, this is money on the bank, points on the board in a game. So I was really impressed with that. And it's something that the team kind of carried on and was continuing to do for a long time. Then the second part was more of a talk for you mentally. And like, he went into quite a bit of detail on that. And then ultimately it was a case of lying down on the floor, closing your eyes for maybe the guts 20 minutes and nobody opening them, and a certain amount of discussion, or like, he was basically leading a narration for a while until ultimately you open your eyes to a certain sort of realization. Now, for me, that did not work at all. In fact, I was almost kind of dismissed.
Can I interrupt that point, though? That didn't work for you whatsoever. And I know I'm getting into it for the second time in this interview, but like, just going back to the time that I did This Is Our Year, and Kevin Cassidy was telling me about the various things that Jim McGuinness did. And obviously McGuinness is a qualification in sports performance, sports psychology, I'm not sure. But this is an area that he certainly had a level of expertise. And before they played at Cavan in the Ulster quarter-final, they stopped off the Kilmore Hotel and they had their breakfast, and then McGuinness instructed them to all go into this ballroom. There was sheets and pillows and cushions, told them to all lie down on the ground, closed all the windows, and then he walked among them talking. And while you're saying, God, that didn't work for me at all, I couldn't understand that, what was the point of that? Then someone like McGuinness does it, and he wins an Ulster title, their first title in God knows how many years. 18, I think it was or 19 from 92. And he's hailed as a genius. Well, what's the difference in the two techniques there, or what they're doing? I don't know.
Well, there's probably not a whole lot, but I just wonder, these things can never be measured. Nobody will ever know if Donegal would have flopped on that day if they didn't do that. So again, it's not that I'm dismissing sports psychology. It's just I have big question marks over it, and I particularly hate the people from celebrity backgrounds who cash in on it and basically treat mental health or psychology as something that can be monetized.
Yeah, look, I think I know who you're getting at. And we're not going to name names here.
There's actually a number of people, and we're not going to name any of them. Yeah,
there's so many of them out there at the moment, and so many of them that don't have a formal qualification, right? Okay, but there are some that are genuinely worthy people who are just relating their experiences, right? They are just relating their experiences and encouraging people to do what they did in order to get them over a hump that they had, or like hump sounds frivolous, like just something traumatic in their life. And I would have good admiration for that. And I am going to name this one name because I'm not saying anything negative. It's someone like Chris Kerr, former Antrim goalkeeper. Like, he has done a lot of good work for people, like a lot of behind the scenes stuff, and he has a bit of a profile for it. And recently someone sort of trolled him on the online there about that, give it a rest, Chris. And I disagree with that. I think Chris should use his profile for that kind of thing. Now, there are other people, and that you're hinting at, who have absolutely no background in this and are doing it. But as far as I can make out, it is a racket for them, and they can come off all caring and altruistic, but they're charging an absolute bomb for this, and it's not right, and it's kind of disgusting. I wouldn't be at all in favour of anything like that.
And but I'm
going to name one other name, and that's like something that we did last year with our own club here. As we brought Oisin McConville down, and Oisin took a training session that was forward play based. And sure, everyone loves that because everyone loves getting a chance to shoot, chance to score. And then he gave a talk which went on for about roughly an hour, his talk. And then he says, have you any questions? And the questions were slow coming. But once people got into their stride, he spoke for an hour and a half. And that was the best thing, I think, personally. It's one of the nicest things I've ever seen happening in a club environment. People were glowing about it. And a lot of teammates started having conversations with each other that they simply would never have had, only because they felt open to it. They felt like a new sort of attitude among people of honesty and not holding back, so that helped us remarkably. And be honest, like other people I've spoken in management teams, that when we're having conversations off the record, I often recommend you should give this guy a try because he's got an awful lot of good things to say.
But just to bring it all back around, that didn't work for me that time in the dressing room. But it's really not that I don't believe in sports psychology. I definitely do. And I'll give another example. We're on the way to I think we were getting a police escort over to Croke Park for the All-Ireland a couple of years ago. I can't remember which one it was.
In your Merc?
Yeah, in our Mercs. But so we were in the bus, and it just felt like such a serious atmosphere around me. And I was a bit like, I was going to be starting on the bench that day, but I knew this isn't conducive to me giving my best. And I don't know if this is normal for how we would all act on the way to a game. You wouldn't. You'd be relaxed, having a crack. And being a countryman playing for the city club, especially Southside poshies like some of them are, as I like to tell them, one of the things that I found it worked instantly when I joined the club that people enjoyed was just the boggerness in general, just coming in and saying, well, and just hamming it up to the last. So I just kind of started hamming it up to the last, saying, Jesus lads, I haven't a fucking stitch to wear tonight after this match. This sort of nonsense. I'm not saying I'm a comedian by any stretch of the imagination, but I just noticed that a couple of people lightened up because of it. Would we have, I think we drew that one, would we have drawn or lost or whatever? I have no idea. But I suppose there's a form of psychology to lots of stuff.
Shut your mouth is 101.
But the whole point is, I do believe in it. It's just, sometimes there's a vagueness to it. Sometimes it feels like there isn't always a great point to it. But that's not to dismiss them all, because some of them, especially the more qualified, are brilliant.
Whatever outcome that happens, process and outcome to talk about. And some people find the terms of, sports psychology in inverted commas, because we're talking about a wide range of things here. Like we're talking about all sorts of manner of practices and experiences and all that. If people win, they will point to, well, that there was a factor. If they lose, they will point to a million different things and say that wasn't good, that wasn't right. But that's just shaping. The lies that we tell each other are nothing to the lies that we can tell ourselves. I can tell you, we all know that. But say for example, I don't know, I just want to tell a couple of yarns, because I'm just thinking of John Morrison here. John Morrison is the late John Morrison, just a magnificent fella now. God love him, God rest him. He was a Gaelic Life columnist when I was there as editor, and I got to know him through that. And what a fella, just positivity. Every time he was big into self-talk, and he said that every morning he used to go into the bathroom and look into the mirror, and he says, John, I can't believe it. You're even more handsome this morning than you were. How do you do it, John? And he says that used to put him in a good mood. And, it's like sort of fake it till you make it thing. And there was echoes of that when Brendan O'Carroll was on the Tommy Tiernan show recently. He was saying exactly the same thing. And I think there's something in that. Go back to John. John had all sorts of, he was, you didn't know half the time if he was doing stuff for the sheer crack of it. We actually Gaelic Life entered a sevens competition in Cherryville playing fields in Belfast in 2010. And John made us get into a huddle. There was myself and a few other reporters on the paper, and Stephen Poacher he was playing for us that day because he was a columnist. Thomas Niblock from the BBC, he was a columnist, and he started telling us about how we were gorillas in the wild and all this kind of story, and we were looking at each other, and then he made us do this warm-up, and part of the warm-up was we all had to get down on all fours and crawl like a bear. And everyone that's ever been in Cherryville will know that the place is covered in dog shit. And the Northern Ireland bar, the solicitors and barristers team were looking over. I had a cousin who was playing for them, and he was his eyes were just going up to heaven. What on under God are these boys doing? And we just went along with it because John's so authoritative, and you just wanted to please him. And then after the whole day was out, I said, John, what about the bear thing? See the crawling? What muscles did that activate? Because you'd be sort of I was coaching underage teams at the club and all that at the time. He says, nothing at all. I just wanted to see if you should all do what I asked.
You have to admire that too. But maybe that even relaxed you, put you in good form. It's hard to know what these things actually.
And other things remember when him and Mickey Moore were in charge at Donegal, and they were coming into Croke Park to play hold on now, maybe I'm wrong, but they were coming into Clones to play Armagh, a championship game, and he put on a tape as they were coming just into Clones, and it was Paul Brady, the homes of Donegal, and just as the song reached its crescendo, they all just emptied out of the bus, and Cass says the feeling among the players have never felt hair on their head like it. And the final one, when he was with Antrim in the mid-90s, he used to do something similar to what you're talking about, a darkened room, and he told the boys that they were in the dark, but they were kind of come into the light. and it was time to emerge into the light. And then he went to turn the light switch on because it was dark evening, like it was a pre-season night. And he blew the bulb. The bulb blew. And then, in fairness to John, like, I mean, so many people would get po-faced or think that the experience was ruined, like, and he just laughed and laughed and laughed.
What can you do,
So
only laugh?
we're a way off, aren't we?
We are. Joe, I was going to ask you, yesterday, which was Monday, was Boris Johnson announcing effectively a fairly strong version of a lockdown. No more than 2 people at a gathering, people not really leaving their houses, go and get your food, maybe a bit of exercise. Some of it that regards that requires self-policing. What's the reality? You're just inside the border there, and as you said to me last week, you can kind of see the border from your house. What's the new reality of life up there at the moment?
I'll not. I can't speak for other people because my experience is that with us is nothing much has changed. In so much as I work from home, I've got an office here, and my wife's in maternity. We have a 2-month-old son. We have a 20-month daughter and a 4.5-year-old. Obviously, like, the school closing is a bit of a disaster for our wee fella. He was in P1 and he was enjoying school greatly, loving his teacher. She was really making a serious job of moulding that whole classroom, and he misses that social outlet. He misses it, and he's asking about swimming pool, which we would have went to all the time. He's asking about play parks, and he's kind of like, with the best will in the world, like, there's an awful lot of homeschooling and competitive parenting going on online there. You might see a load of, here's my, I've broken my day up into 10-minute gaps for my baby, and they're going to do yoga, and then they're going to do French, and then they're going to learn German, and then they're going to do Tai Chi outside. And when you have a 4.5, a 20-month, and a 2-month, I'll tell you, it's about survival. Like, it's about throwing them a toffee crisp and just getting them to, so there's a lot of sort of outside play as much as I can. There's wee bits and pieces of gardening we'd be doing and all that. That he loves getting his hands dirty. Like, he's the main one because he's the guy that needs to be entertained. Like, the daughter is so quiet. I'm getting away from the point, which probably you're asking, how are things different? Like, I didn't have to leave the house to do my work, and she's off on maternity leave anyway. So there's not that much different in my life. The schools have been told that they need to keep open for key workers, but some of the teachers I've been speaking to have said there wasn't a single child in school. So, I'd have had a very active life up here anyway in the GA, involved in the local football team and with the local hurling and camogie team. So that would have been at least one night out for each of them per week, helping out with the coaching or doing whatever. And then obviously the games, the club month, looking forward to that coming up. That's all out. So it's just hunkering down. We are lucky. I will say this: like, we're very lucky that we live very rural. I mean, I was able to go on Sunday morning there, and I was meant to go out with a friend of mine who lives about 8 mile away. We said we'd go for a cycle around North Monaghan, up around the bit of the hills and stuff like that. I woke up at 6 and then sent him a message saying, I don't think we actually should meet. I think we should just really be diligent here, like, and not. And obviously 24 hours later, Boris Johnson's telling you cannot meet, like, not unless you're from the same household. So I think we were sort of ahead of, we're both trying to do the best anyway. But it's definitely going to affect people. Like, I don't know if it's easier to be in the country or the town, because you've seen that tweet from someone taking a picture of, was it Dublin 8, and everyone in the wee sort of old cottages, the wee bungalow cottages, sitting outside their door, all in the street. I mean, I just thought that's absolutely wonderful for people, that they can still see each other, still be, physically distant enough to have an effect and do best practice and all the rest. But it's different. Like, it's different for all of us, isn't it?
I even wonder in the GA sense, is every team adhering to the whole idea of social distancing? Or anecdotally, you'd hear, maybe not so much this week, but kind of suggestions that teams are, players are taking it upon themselves to meet in 4s and 5s and do a bit of working out and what have you. And I would imagine pretty much every team is trying to keep their players tipping away. Doing some fitness runs. Do a bit of working out at home or wherever you live
Yeah.
if you can,
Yeah.
and trying to find ways to do that because no one knows when it
Yeah.
gets going again. But the point to make is, like we're there doing our runs ourselves, and part of me, like I'm very, very cautious at the moment. I barely go outside the door from one end of the day to the next unless I need to do some shopping and maybe go for a walk and keep a mile away from everyone. But I went and I did some runs there the other day, and I was a bit like, would it be so bad if I kind of said, okay, I'll meet you down at the local field, to another player who drove separately. We both arrive.
Mm.
We both start at
Mhm.
let's say even 5 meters apart from each other, both on the end line, and do our runs together because we can drive each other on. Now, like if even if you had three lads doing that and you were all 5 meters abreast from each other, if you're disciplined enough to do that, is that kind of okay? I mean, because like on one hand, I'm ultra cautious and almost over the top about this, but the flip side, I'm like, is that okay if everyone is cautious enough about how you organize this?
I know what you're saying, and I don't have I, I don't know if I have a problem with that or not. And I think if you're being totally responsible in it, then yes. But and I'll tell you why it shouldn't happen though, because it just sends out a signal to others that such and such are at it. Even say for example, someone from say that was going on in our local pitch, right? And someone from, say, the next town over is Ballygolly, Kieran, right? Say someone from Kieran was, I don't know, getting diesel across the border and happened to be driving past our pitch and seen three lads out doing that. Well, then they're going to say into their WhatsApp group, see, such and such, that crowd are out doing a wee bit of collective training. Maybe we should. So I think that anyone that groups up at all, it almost it just it dilutes the impact of what this is meant to be about. And I think that it's not great for us that we all have to be on our own, and there will be ramifications. There will be mental problems for people. There'll be a period of readjustment, all those things. But I think that it's worth it right now.
I actually tend to agree. You've actually fully swayed me on that. Even just sending out that wrong message, because the more people think, I see other people at it. Yeah, the worse it's going to become.
Because I mean, like you do that, and the next thing then the neighbouring club does that, and the neighbouring club does that. Next thing you know, there's 56 clubs in Tyrone all doing that, and then the casual man who just is down to say brush up or clean out the dressing rooms or do something around the club, they see that and they say, "Jeez, I wouldn't mind going out for an hour run myself." And next thing you know, he's away out with two of his mates. Uh, I just think that we just setting in for this. People are talking about this like this is totally unprecedented in our times. Like there's a lot of war metaphors, and then there's a lot of sound advice that this is not a war. Like this is a war when you don't have to pick up a rifle or a bayonet or do hand to hand combat. You just have to stay among your own people, just your own wee unit. I mean, how hard is that? Like, can we manage that? And if we can, then we can do the best. We can minimize everything. We can do the best we can do. I mean, this is not like advances of technology and all that is brilliant. Like your Netflix and all your internet and everything that keeps people occupied nowadays. But there's also like just the pleasure that's taken in going for a walk on your own in a quiet forest, or going for a walk up and down the road a little bit, or like even just doing something like it's very simple as I do it with the young fella to tire him out at night about 6 o'clock. Is you do a Joe Wicks workout on YouTube, and we'll do that for 20 minutes, flat out, the two of us. We'll be sweating in the bedroom and all the rest. But I'll tell you what it does. It gets him to sleep at night. There's a lot of wee things, and this is one of the things that Dr. Ciarán said in the pieces. We have to reevaluate. We have to look at our world has shrunk, and our goals have to shrink with that. We have to say, well, we get up in the morning, right? What are my goals for today? And they might be very simple, but there's a satisfaction in reaching all of them. And that might be, well, I'm going to do my work, I'm going to cook a meal, my family are going to cook a meal. We're all in together, we're safe, nobody's going to be out at an activity, or no harm is going to become of us. and then we'll get them down, we'll read children's stories, put them down to bed, and then more or less the day is over, and you have like an hour and a half to chill out, watch a wee bit of the news, whatever, and then you start again. I mean, there'll be, to my mind, as well as everything else, there will be moments where people get a chance to reflect on their lives and their paths, they choose, their choices. I think there'll be a great not a humiliation, but there'll be a lot of people will become a lot more humble at the end of this process than they were before, and you can never have enough humility.
I wonder too, and it's all very trivial because what we're facing in the next number of months, all the projections are we're going to face absolute horror. So to talk about sports and the ramification for this for sports feels a little bit trite, but I'm going to do so anyway, just to sort of, I don't know, as a distraction as much as anything else. But are certain players going to be pulled out of what we often hear described of as the bubble, and then realise, right, maybe I don't need my identity 7 days a week wrapped up in GA, and even spending time away from that bubble has made me reconsider the fact that, is this the way I want to live my life?
I know, it's such an interesting concept. And I think that you might see a bit of both. I'm going to be hyper local here and refer to like a great lad, a centre half forward for the club here called Tiernan Donnelly. Brilliant fella. Mopey as bedamned, like in a training session, like always got a big long face, and when he's asked to do work, always asking when's this session over. Would not be a fan of the runs, but he's supreme. He's very, very gifted footballer, lovely player. And he tweeted last night, and I just thought it was magnificent. He says, "I'll never complain about a session with no footballs in it ever again." And you might see a lot of boys that have no exercise now at all, and they might actually, they might have get caught up in that sort of narrative that gets pushed a wee bit now, and not everyone, by some people that would be strong advocates of the GPA, and I would be an advocate in certain respects of Gaelic Players Association, but the love and I'll whinge about sacrifices and the demands of the game and the sacrifices they make. And if you want to go back to even Dr. Ciarán's piece again, he said a brilliant thing. He says, people talk about sacrifices and all that, but he cannot square that at all, because he says these are choices you make. I mean, do you want to leave the house on a wet evening and go and run and play football and exert yourself and work a sweat up for an hour and a half, and then have a meal and then come home for a good night's sleep? Or do you want to sit on the sofa? That's the choice that you make. I mean, people who talk about the sacrifices and demands, it's where they're all destined to be brain surgeons and all that, as if Gaelic football and hurling does nothing for them, whereas in actual fact it enhances their life greatly. So while you might see an awful lot of people saying, right, I'm out of this bubble, I'm just going to do a wee bit of cycling and running, and they might say, I'm going to take a year out and I'm going to run 3 marathons. I'm going to take a year out and I might take part in a load of different bicycle races. But is that any more so than any other year? By and large, the average is of people that fall off county panels about 1 in every 3 at the minute. That's right across the board, and a very general case. You're going to have far more turnover players in a county like Longford than you are in Dublin, where everybody knows success and all that. But by and large, it's 1 in 3. But if you, and quite a lot is made about that the modern game can't hold panels. If you went back 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, you'll find the exact same thing. People did not dedicate their lives, a decade, 12, 14 years to playing Gaelic football and hurling at an inter-county level. It just didn't happen. And even at that, it was a much smaller commitment at the time. So while there will be some people will use this period of reflection and say, maybe this is not for me, but maybe that was something that they were going to come to realization anyway. And maybe there'll be others who are taking time out to say, my God, I miss this. I miss the structure. I miss the whole being part of something outside of myself, which I think for most people, you talk to the lesser successful counties, that's what it means. It's actually a sense of pride in self. And there is still, as old-fashioned as it sounds, like there's still a huge pride in the jersey. There's still a lot of people's ambition is to play for their county, no matter what.
Yeah, and like as you said, and Dr. Kearney said, it's about a choice. Some people binge watch Netflix, some people binge play GEA and prepare and all that kind of stuff. We're all kind of binge in a different way. But another thing, one of the big knock-on effects in what's happening at the moment is that a lot of people are being forced to work remotely. So, I mean, I work from home an awful lot as a journalist, you do the same. And I just wonder about the effect of, like, let's say a couple of months' time, everyone's gotten used to working at home, or a lot of the people that have maintained their jobs are now working at home, and companies see that it's possible, people see it's possible. Will we start to see a shift away from the centralisation of, let's say, the south, for example, where everything is pulled towards Dublin? You could have people from Kerry, Donegal, Mayo, and these are, I specifically bring up county teams that have players that commute to Dublin.
Yes.
And like, if
Yes.
we end up with people working remotely, does that lad from Kerry need to live in Dublin anymore? Or can he apply for a job in Dublin while never leaving the place? Does that help his community, his club? Does it mean fewer people up in Dublin all pushing for the same accommodation and driving prices through the roof? Does it mean fewer people living out in the streets because, the cost of accommodation and buying a house? I actually think in a million different ways. I mean, and obviously I'm always thinking that we are in for absolute hell here, but I'm just trying to think of other things that they are trying.
Well, I never thought of that. I never thought of that, but it certainly would benefit a great number of, say, county teams like Donegal that would have had a large enough proportion of their players.
And it is all trivial.
working.
It's not to kind of dismiss the real horror,
Yeah, I know, but there's only so long we can dwell on the gravity of the situation too. Like, I mean, we are just developing a conversation here, like, in fairness. So that would do the country absolutely no harm. Like, it would do Ireland no harm, because favouring Dublin and the whole general drift eastwards of the whole country is only ever going to. Well, it just creates what we saw in the lead up to the election, is just the magnifying glass was certainly on housing, and people rejected the two traditional parties and were impressed about what Sinn Féin were saying over housing. So some of the antics of landlords in Dublin were obscene, like advertising garage spaces as dwelling quarters, like that sort of thing is just indefensible. And if there is patterns established that this working from home, this is acceptable, this works for us, and we can do it, like, why not? I mean, these are energetic communities out west. And in places like Kerry, and they need the brightest and best. I mean, you take a county like Fermanagh, families are getting smaller, and certainly a proportion of the brightest and best move to Belfast, where the big jobs are in health and IT and so on, and they tend to stay there. And so what you get is a gradual levelling off of ability, and smaller families and clubs. Then, like, and this is a friend of mine, Stephen Jackson, that is involved with the Fermanagh senior team as a statsman, but he has a daughter that plays for the county, and he has a son that plays senior football. And he would tell me, and he informed me, a really interesting conversation I had with him recently. Basically, there's only 20 clubs in Fermanagh to start with, but about 7 of them, 8 of them will be looking at amalgamating over the next decade. Now, you take that's a Division 2 side, one of the top 16 teams. I know that they're kind of struggling now, but for the most part, Fermanagh over the last 2 decades have been knocking about too good for Division 3, and perhaps maybe just shaving a few years in Division 2. Like, so what you might be in with is a county with about, say, 13 clubs. I mean, that gives you an illustration of just the eastward drift. I mean, we talk about Dublin. I'm talking about there's a county in the west that all the population is sort of migrating towards the east too. So, I mean, you'll not find any. As someone that lives in a very rural part of the world here too, like, I mean, I'm all for that. Like, I mean, our communities, our towns, our villages outside of major cities have to be populated and have to be with people of ability. Like I strongly agree with that.
Like I grew up in a small parish in Tipperary. When I grew up, there was far more pubs in the town. There was more shops. There was like different parts of the town have closed down over the years, and I think this is something you're seeing across the country. And GAA clubs are probably the last thing drawing people and young people back to the parishes. So I just imagine a situation whereby people are working remotely and staying in their hometowns all across Ireland, and you have these shared workspaces popping up. You know, like you can currently, there's a place not too far from me where like I might work for myself, you work for yourself, but we're all renting a shared office space just so we can get out of the house. So they crop up. All of a sudden broadband has to be rolled quicker out around the country because people are working from all over Ireland. It's actually a chance to reshift or to shift everything within Ireland to sort of, I don't know, I mean, let's say you have more people staying at home to work, that means more businesses can survive in different parts of the country. And I just think a rising tide lifts all boats that way.
Yeah, yeah, and like, I mean, we come out of this and there's 4 out of 10 people in a job, then we're doing well, aren't we? Like, it's just unprecedented. But maybe we'll come back to that. That's probably a whole other area of discussion that we could maybe come back to in a fortnight or 3 weeks' time. See where we're at that point.
Yeah, I think we've enough said there, and half of that we weren't even planning on going into. But thanks very much, Declan Bogue. We'll chat again.
No problem, Shane.